Hope, the only thing stronger than fear. You know the story? Yes. Then you know that President Snow is the incarnation of the word ruthless. Yes? And his one desire is complete and unchallenged control over the 12 districts of Panem. A control he intends to maintain in part via his sick Hunger Games. Yeah? How interesting is it that this embodiment of the word evil, this ultimate villain, would have figured out that hope is the only force on this planet that is stronger than fear. And he intends to use it. And in case you are keeping track of the fact that Mockingjay Part 2 is coming out in just a few days, you probably know that hope is going to turn out to be a little bit more than this villain can handle. So in the minutes that I have with you this morning, I want to talk with you about this concept of hope. Hope that is stronger than fear. Hope that is more potent than despair. Hope, the inheritance of the Christian, and hope that offers a road from nowhere to somewhere if there's someone who will walk it with you. I am so privileged to get to be here with you guys this morning. I get to interact with you periodically in my intermediate Hebrew classes and my Hebrew exegesis classes, but generally, I don't get to see you as much as I like. So I hope so much that this word on hope will be an encouragement to you. So you might be wondering, how in the world did Richter ever get interested in the concept of hope? Well, this past spring, I was teaching the book of Isaiah, as is my wont, with 30 fabulous undergrads. Okay, well, maybe not all of them were fabulous all of the time, but that would be another story. And in light of our liberal arts identity here at Wheaton College, I challenged my undergrads to do their final exegesis projects in a transdisciplinary fashion. In other words, I forced the Bible and theology majors to work with the business and econ majors and the psych majors and the forestry majors in order to come up with a final exegetical project that was actually informed by somebody else's discipline. Don't you hate it when profs do stuff like that? Well, to my great surprise and joy, the 3 psychology majors that I had in this class all saw in the book of Isaiah, these profound oracles, the exact same thing. And do you know what they saw in Isaiah? You can guess. They saw hope. Hope spoken in passionate, compelling terms by our prophet to a broken and despairing people, Israel. A populace whose own sin had finally caught up with them and left them with absolutely nothing. And as I listened to my students, being a Bible and theology kind of gal, I was stunned and I was captured because I had no idea that hope was something that could be quantified. For all of you psych majors out there, I know you already know this, but I didn't know this. I didn't know that hope is an actual psychological category. I didn't know that hope theory is apparently one of the hottest topics in the business right now. Nor did I have any idea that there were mechanisms for creating hope, or that hope can be learned. And nor, of course, could I possibly know that the Word of God through Isaiah could be analyzed as one of those mechanisms, spoken to offer a broken and despairing people a road back from despair into a future of not just changed circumstances, but of changed life. So, for all of us Bible and theology types, what is hope? Well, counseling and psych majors, bear with me while I do my amateur treatment here. According to C.R. Snyder, who I understand is this generation's hope guru, hope is the perceived capability to imagine and pursue pathways to goals that get a person out of where they are into the place they want to be. Moreover, it's the ability to motivate yourself to use those pathways. So hope involves agency, that's the motivation or ability to move forward, and pathways. That's this identified avenue by which to move forward. Now, as you can hear in this definition, according to the hope gurus and according to Snyder, hope ultimately starts with me. You can hear it, can't you? Right? It requires me to find a pathway forward. That's the pathway. And it requires me to get moving on that path. That's agency, which most of the time a healthy adult is able to do. But here's the rub, or here are the two rubs. What happens when we're not dealing with a healthy adult? What about when we're instead dealing with an exhausted or injured adult who's come to the end of their proverbial road? Those who, due to the injuries of their past and the agonies of their present, find themselves ready to throw in the towel. You know, the type of anxiety that doesn't let you sleep or eat, the type of despair that has you seriously pondering what the best mechanism for relieving this world of your presence might be, the type of injustice that has broken you, and you simply don't have it in you to get up one more time and try again. That's one rub. And then there's the other one. What about those crazy people who are looking into the stark realities of the impossible and still continue to hope? What about that HIV-positive widow living in the refugee camp in South Sudan with 4 children depending on her, who has absolutely no reasonable pathway into a better future? Why does she continue to hope? Well, E.M. Tong, the other hope guru of our generation, states that under these conditions, Snyder's model doesn't work. When personal influence has lost all relevance, those extremely traumatic situations in which people are aware that what is so deeply desired is simply absolutely out of reach, when neither their talents nor their resources can get them there, when hope is seemingly exhausted, but it remains. What do you do with those people? Well, I'm no hope guru, but I can tell you that the conditions that E.M. Tong is describing are exactly the conditions that faced Isaiah's audience. We're in Isaiah chapter 43, verses 1 through 7. Israel has been a nation since Moses came down off of Mount Sinai with 2 tablets of the covenant in his hands. The day that God said, "Will you?" and Israel said, "Yes." The promise was that God would give this homeless people the land of Israel as a land grant. And if Israel would keep God's covenant, they would keep the land. He would give them houses that they had not built, vineyards that they had not planted, olive groves that they had not tended. And as it takes an olive grove 20 years to begin to bear fruit, that's a big deal. From the perspective of a nomadic people whose most recent memory was generations of slavery, followed by a generation of homelessness, Yahweh had offered them paradise. More importantly, he had blessed them by giving them a new identity. He had covered them with his own identity. But he also promised that if they broke this covenant, they would be driven from this land. And therefore, all of the economic stability and military security that had come through this promise would be forfeited if they failed to maintain their covenant relationship with Yahweh. These realities, these demands were minimal, but they were not negotiable. Well, by the year 586 BC, when we pick up the story that frames Isaiah's oracle, Israel has proven that they are completely faithless. They have broken every promise they have ever made. They've proven beyond any question that they will not and cannot keep this covenant. And so as our prophet catalogs, line upon line, this covenant people had over and over again chosen other gods over the one that saved them, wealth over justice, religiosity over piety, the honor of men over the honor of God. And God himself is left in the position in the first oracle of this book saying, where can I discipline you again? I've beaten you from head to foot. I've taken away every privilege. I've done everything I know how to do to conform your behavior to my standard, and there's nothing left to do. And so in 586 BC, the hammer falls. And the God of Israel at last fulfills his covenant curse against his nation. He sends his servant, how heartbreaking, his servant, the pagan king, Nebuchadnezzar, to wipe out his covenant people. The villages of Israel are burned. There's blood running in the streets. There's bodies piled in the alley. And anyone who manages to survive this total military takeover is tied one to the next and dragged off 1,200 miles as a slave into exile. Hence, the exile. And in this devastation, the citizens of Israel lose absolutely everything. They certainly lose their possessions and their homes, but they also lose their careers, their professional standing, the members of their family. The only way that we, a modern audience, can actually fathom this picture is if we think in terms of the Nazi death marches in 1944 and 45. Or we think about the flood of refugees in the South Sudan. Or we think about District 12. This is Israel's scenario. This was the enactment of the covenant curse. It took Israel more than 500 years to get there. It took God a little longer to pull the trigger, but he does pull the trigger. And it's over. It's done. Israel is gone. And as far as we know, has no hope of ever rising again. And the worst part of this whole story is everyone in that caravan of despair was completely clear that their current situation, this bloody march into the exile, was their own stupid fault. They knew it. They had been faithless. They had ignored the cry of the widow and the orphan. They had worshiped gods, other gods of their own making, as opposed to the creator of the universe. They knew that they did not deserve mercy. They did not deserve restoration. They did not deserve another chance. They knew it. If there was ever a people, whose lives were gripped by the iron bars of despair, this was them. When they looked at their current situation, stripped of their homes and their professions, and they tried to find a pathway into the future, nothing. When they tried to stir up the agency to motivate themselves towards something, anything, numb. And they were completely clear that their hopeless situation was their own doing. It's into this reality that Isaiah speaks. He offers Israel the impossible. He says to them at the opening of this oracle that Yahweh has forgiven. He has chosen to pay the ransom, and he's going to bring them home. Hear the words of the Lord. Isaiah 43, verse 1. But now, thus says Yahweh, your creator, O Jacob. I'm your creator. Your designer, O Israel. Do not fear, because I've redeemed you. I've called you by my name, and you are mine. Guys, even in their utter wretchedness, Yahweh stands up in the public square and reclaims this sad excuse of a people as his own. I will redeem, checkbook on the table, whatever the cost. And he will cover their story with his own. When you cross through the waters, I'll be with you, and through the rivers, they will not overflow you. When you go into the midst of the fire, you will not be burned, and the flame will not kindle upon you. Absolutely no promise, O graduate students, that this is going to be easy. But his promise is that he would not allow them to be overwhelmed. Why? Because I, Yahweh, am your God. The Holy One of Israel is your deliverer. I have given Egypt as your ransom, Cush and Seba instead of you, because you are precious in my eyes. You are honored, and I love you. And I will give a person in your place. I will give peoples in exchange for your life. Yes, Israel was guilty. We can get over that. No question. A ransom will have to be paid. I used to say in class, ransom required. But Yahweh claims that he will buy the reprieve on their behalf by means of giving another in their place. Sounds familiar? Why? Because you're precious. For those of you who don't know me yet, let me tell you that one of the best things about my life is that I'm a mom. And there are many in this crowd who are parents. So let me ask you a question. Have you ever stood with your child in a circle of other parents or teachers or PTA officers or coaches or, God forbid, a police officer or probation officer? And everyone standing in that circle knows that your kid has completely and absolutely screwed up. And you see the shame in your child's eyes. You know it. My kid screwed up. And yet you felt that primal urge inside of you. I know what she's done. but she's mine. And you are going to have to move heaven and earth to pry me out of this room. Folks, that is a parent's heart toward their child. And this is God's heart toward Israel. And this is your story. It's God's heart toward you. And here it is, verse 5. Do not fear. Why? Because I'm with you. I'm with you. So many things. I think of my darkest days when hope had evaporated, when I would have given absolutely anything to have someone with actual power step into my agony and take up my cause. I think of my kids and the immeasurable privilege it is that when we cross the street, they always take my hand, even the 13-year-old, because we have a pattern here. You see, I can make my kids go to the doctor, the dentist. I can bring them in for their kindergarten shots. I can get my 4th grader to go meet the teacher that, according to the grapevine, eats 4th graders alive simply by telling them, I'm going to go with you. What a privilege that is. And so when we cross the street, they take my hand. And guys, I think about my God and of all the times he's whispered this truth to me. Let me tell you, all of redemption's story at its core is the story of him paying the highest of prices, simply be able to offer you and me that assurance. I am with you. And neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing is able to separate me from you, or you from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. So Yahweh offers Israel this promise. I'm going with you. I will lead you out of that dark place. Whatever we face, girl, we're facing it together. From the east, I'll bring your offspring. From the west, I'll gather you. I will say to the north, give them up. And to the south, you will not hold them back. You bring out my sons from a distance, my daughters from the edges of heaven. All the ones called by my name, whom I have created for my glory, whom I've fashioned, even whom I have made. We need to remember that the people of Israel had first experienced exile as early as 734 BC. In 722, the north falls, and that whole population is exiled. In 586, it happens again, and the southern kingdom is exiled. And in between, there are 2 or 3 deportations. These people knew what it meant to long in their hearts for children that were somewhere on the edge of heaven. And these displaced people, talk about refugee stress, and their children were scattered to the 4 corners. And Yahweh says in the midst of this, I will bring you back. Your sons, your daughters, your siblings, your parents, everyone who got lost in the midst of this mess, I will find them and I will bring them home. How's he going to bring them home? Well, according to verses 14 through 17, the first thing he's going to do is he's going to march on Babylon. You got to love a God who periodically says, I'm done talking now. And he picks up a bat and he busts the bad guys. Is that politically incorrect? I'm sorry. I will bring them down as fugitives. I am Yahweh, your Holy One, the creator of Israel, your king. I make a way through the sea and a path through the mighty waters. I bring out the chariot and the horse and the army and the mighty man, and they lay there never to rise again, extinguished like a wick. In other words, this God who is asking Israel to trust them has already proven his reputation. Do you hear it? He has already stood in the gap for them. With the deliverance from Egypt, Babylon is small potatoes. And after he defeats Babylon, well, according to 18 through 21, Yahweh is making a way where there was no way. Do you need that word this morning? He is making a way where there was no way. Hear me on this. He is building a highway. This is what my psych students latched onto. He's building a highway where there was no highway before. He's leveling the mountains. He's raising up the valleys. He's throwing open the gates. He's building a pathway for his people to come home. In other words, your God is creating hope for a people who cannot do it for themselves. Verse 18, behold, do not remember the former things or ponder the things of the past. At this moment, I am doing a new thing. Now it will spring forth. Will you not see it? I am placing a highway in the wilderness, rivers in the desert, in order to give drink to my chosen people. This people, who I have designed for myself, they will recount my praise. And you know what? Yahweh was good for his word. Because in 539 BC, you're now ready for that timeline quiz, Babylon was defeated out of the blue by the Persian Empire. And completely out of the blue, the conquering Persian king told all the captives of Babylon, of which there were tens of thousands, you can go home. And according to Psalm 126, the captains of Israel were like those who dreamed. And so those who dared to believe, they went home. Hope, a road from nowhere to somewhere, if there's someone who will walk it with you. So now you should be asking, as good exegetes of the word, how in the world did these people who had been dragged away as prisoners 70 years before, who had learned to wear the name tag failure, exile, outsider, loser, addict, adulterer, ever find the courage to believe in a better future? How did they find the agency to leave the comfort of their familiar but predictable misery and reach for something else? Well, there are two answers to that question. Two answers that you need and the people you're going to serve need. They found that courage based on the character of the one who called them. You see, Yahweh is not a man that he should lie. And Yahweh has earned his reputation. The parting of the Red Sea was no fluke. And two, they found that courage based on a story that was bigger than they were. And so impossibly, miraculously, completely unprecedented in history, Israel went home. And even more miraculously, they rebuilt their lives in the burned out, scattered, flat out scary ruins of Jerusalem. These refugees who'd been staring into the stark realities of impossible, to quote Tong, for whom personal influence had lost all relevance, who had no resources to change their situation or the system that held them, grabbed a hold of hope, in the words of Isaiah, and they believed and they went home. Do not call to mind the former things. Do not dwell upon the things of the past. Behold, I am doing something new right now. Will you not see it? I can assure you that these people were scared to leave what they knew for what they'd only heard about. I can assure you that they were intimidated by a long and dangerous journey ahead. I can assure you that they were more than a little tempted to despair, that their past would forever define their futures. But based on the character of the God who called them, and on a story that was bigger than they were, they got up and they tried again. And these exiles found the agency to become the remnant that ushered in the age of the Christ. These people wrapped themselves in a new story, and they changed the world. So, where do you find yourself this morning? Having spent the bulk of my life hanging out with graduate students, I know all too well that most of you are currently juggling way more balls than you can handle. They're the studies, the job, the marriage, the children, the bishop, the finances, the applications, the lease, the car, and the dream. That awkward liminal space between what you believe you're called to be and what you actually are. All woefully compounded by the detailed inventory you keep on your bathroom mirror of your inadequacies and limitations. All of which, let me tell you, seem much bigger when you're over-caffeinated and under-rested. So I want to tell you something this morning. Based on this story, God knows exactly who you are. And he knows exactly where you've been. He knows every splendid and sordid detail of your past. And he called you anyway. He also knows exactly what you're capable of. Believe it or not, he knows exactly where your limitations begin and your talents stop. Because you know what? He designed you. And here's the biggest surprise of all. Your God is not standing by with a clipboard waiting to check off the box when you finally give up and go down. Rather, your God is standing on the road into your future, and he's saying, come on, wrap yourself in a story that's bigger than you are. We can do this. I know the way, and I've got you. Get up, get going. Hope, based on the character of a God who has proven himself over and over. Hope, based on a story that's bigger than we are. That's what gave the exiles the agency to take the first step on the pathway that the Almighty had already built for them. This is the same hope that brought the women to the empty tomb, and they found a resurrection. It's the same hope that lowered the lame man through the roof, and he found healing. What if they hadn't come? My word to you, dear ones, is this morning. Choose hope. It's stronger than fear. Amen.